Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar hosted by Vivid, the independent micro-focus user community. I'm your moderator, Tom Price, and today James Walker will be presenting on the topic of model-based testing for UFT1 and UFT developer, optimized test script generation. Next slide, please, James. And so this special interest group webinar is brought to you by Vivid's Testing, Quality and ALM Special Interest Group. I'd like to thank the group leaders, Andreas Burke, founder and principal consultant of Software Process Management, Mihai Grigorescu, who's test process manager at Accenture, Robert Linton, business consultant at Micro Focus Government Solutions, and Christopher Scherer, who's senior SQA test automation consultant at Tech Systems. Next slide, please, James. So I'm Thomas Price. I'm communication manager with Curiosity Software Ireland. I've had the pleasure of working with James and with Vivid for about 6 years or so. Vivid, a brilliant organisation, and I'm very grateful and excited for them having me here today. Next slide. Thank you, James. So James is your speaker. James is a seasoned software inventor and software development engineer and test. He holds a PhD in data visualization and now specializes in model-based test automation and test data management. He's going to be applying this expertise today for test data, for UFT script and data generation and maintenance. Next slide, please, James. So first, a bit of housekeeping before we get started. So this session is live and is available to all Vivid members. It will be recorded and we'll make the recording, the slide deck and the Q&A transcript available on the Vivid website. In the coming days, you'll also receive copies of these via email. Please do ask questions as we go along, and we'd love to make this an interactive discussion. Simply type your questions in the question pane of the webinar control panel. I'll then gather up all the questions and we will have some time at the end to go through those on a live Q&A. Next slide, please, James. Cool, so here is the webinar control panel. So as said, to ask a question, just make sure the question box is expanded, type your question in and hit send. All right, I think that's everything, James. So thanks, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. Absolute pleasure to be hosting this webinar today. And I think it's quite an exciting topic on model-based testing with UFT. We've had a lot of sign-ups, so yeah, really looking forward to it. So just before we get started, a bit of an agenda of what we're going to go through today. So firstly, we're going to give a bit of an introduction into what we're seeing in the industry in terms of barriers to successful test automation, and where we're really seeing a lot of companies struggle with actually implementing test automation. We're then going to give a bit of a background into our kind of take and our new approach to how we're addressing some of these challenges in the test automation landscape using model-based testing. This webinar is going to be quite hands-on, so we're going to spend quite a lot of time really getting into it into some real-world demos. The first one we're going to look at is model-based test automation for UFT, and actually how we can use model-based testing with UFT as it exists. And then secondly, what we're going to take a little bit of a look at is test data automation. So how we can include model-based testing with the test data we need while we're performing test automation. And again, that's all going to be very centric around UFT. As Tom mentioned in the beginning there, we're going to have quite a bit of time at the end for questions and discussion. So as we're going through, please post your questions. We will pick all of them up at the end, and we'd love to get your comments and questions as we're going through. Okay, so let's get started with some barriers to successful test automation. Now, I think it's no surprise that, there's a great understanding that automation, is necessary in the way we're building software today, okay? Development teams can move incredibly fast. They can develop software at incredibly fast rates. And the cadence we need to release that now, especially in agile environments, is very, very fast. Manual testing can't keep up with this rate of change, and automation really is very necessary to be able to test at the speed that we're essentially developing at. Okay, so a survey in 2018 revealed that 90% of organizations believe that test automation is necessary and allows QA to perform their tests quicker. Okay, now what we're seeing in the industry today, and as confirmed in the most recent World Quality Report, is that 19% of user acceptance tests are being automated. Okay, so only 19% of all tests being run are actually automated. So that means that just over 80% of all testing in the software development lifecycle is still a manual process, which is obviously incredibly low. And this is, pretty common to what we're seeing in the industry, and a lot of the companies we're working with, they're still very manual testing centric. So, what are the reasons for low automation? Why have we not seen, a much bigger increase and a much bigger intake in our testing being automated? Well, we're kind of seeing 5 main core challenges. Okay, I think historically, there was a big kind of, mindset where it was that automated testing will fix a lot of, the downsides we've seen with manual testing. Okay, instead of having to manually create scripts, they will be automatically created, and we're almost perceiving automated testing as kind of a silver bullet approach. Okay. The reality is that a lot of automated testing is still manual. You still have to manually go in and actually create test scripts. Okay, and then furthermore to that, once a script is created, throughout the life cycle, and as long as that script persists, you have to keep maintaining it and keeping it alive. Okay, so script creation and maintenance, it's still very much manual in automated testing. And, it's one of the most time-consuming QA activities for over 20% of the organizations from a recent survey. Another challenge is to do with test coverage. So, a lot of automated tests still have a very low level of coverage of the actual application. Just because we're switching from manual testing to automated testing, all we're actually doing is just automating that execution of tests. If we're not creating good test cases, which are covering, a good degree of our application to begin with, just because we're automating them doesn't mean we're in any better situation. We're still going to persist with a low level of test coverage. The third piece here, which is kind of one of our areas of expertise, is in test data. Now, whenever you're testing any kind of screen or any kind of part of your application, even if it's an API or we're testing at a data level, you need to have good test data available to be able to test those specific combinations of data. Historically, a lot of companies have used techniques like masking, which is where we're taking production data, stripping out, all of the personal identifiable information and replacing it with perhaps pseudo-anonymous, data. The problem with techniques like masking is that, you're only as good, you're only testing as well as the production data that we have available. Okay, so if we don't have specific combinations of data in our production environments, we cannot be testing those types of data in our test environments because we do not have that test data available. So, test data can create bottlenecks because, we spend a lot of time waiting for the right data to be provisioned, but also test data can be very challenging because as testers, we need to have the right test data available in the right places at the right time to support the tests that we want to run, whether they be manual tests or automated tests. So the fourth one here is to do with test maintenance. Now, automated tests can be very, very brittle. We've all been there where we've run a test once and it's passed, and we've run the same test a second time, exactly the same environment, nothing has changed, but it has failed. brittle tests can be very, very challenging, but also if our application changes, we need to go through and maintain every single test that has been impacted by that change. And, if you speak to most automation engineers and ask them, what is, a big challenge for you, they will come out and they will say that test maintenance is one of the hardest pieces. It's very easy to lose any return on investment from test automation just through test maintenance alone. We spend more time actually maintaining our tests than it would be to actually run these tests manually in the first place. Okay. The fifth piece here is automation code is rarely reusable. And also there's not enough skilled engineers to actually share the burden of scripting. Okay. So, to actually create good automation code, you need to have a really good framework, a really good architecture involved from the beginning. You've got to look at your automation framework like another piece of source code. If we're developing an application, the architecture is absolutely paramount to the success of the application we're creating. It's exactly the same with an automation framework. We need to have a great architecture in there with reusable components. And to do that, you need to have a really high-skilled team of good automation engineers or good developers, essentially. And unfortunately, in the marketplace, there is not, an abundance of skilled automation developers. It's a relatively new discipline. We're still learning to a certain extent. There's a lot of new tools out there, a lot of new technology, coming almost every month, I would say. So, we're still learning. There's a lot of challenges and, there's a lot of questions that still need answering. But I would say this is, one of the more challenging pieces on this list. Anyway, these are kind of the 5 main barriers that we're seeing to test automation adoption. Hopefully some of these are resonating with you, with the companies you're in at the moment. Certainly with the companies we're working with, this is kind of how we're seeing the landscape at the moment. So let's be a bit more positive and let's start thinking about some new approaches to test automation and how we can start addressing some of these challenges. So one of the tools we're going to be using today is UFT, which is obviously a micro-focused tool. And, one of the things we really like about UFT is over the past few years, they've introduced a lot of new and fantastic functionality to help meet these automation challenges head on. So under the UFT family, there's UFT1, there's also the UFT Developer. UFT Developer is obviously incredibly developer friendly. You can go into your IDE, you can start coding your automation scenarios. But also with UFT1, there's a lot of growing language support. There's all sorts of object spies, recorders, and also easy to use object repositories as well, which is really lowering that barrier to entry to actually get started with test automation, and also enforcing you to follow their kind of architectures and referencing to actually building out a good automation framework in the tool. So what we're going to be going through in this webinar today is actually coupling together, all of these powerful features of UFT with model-based testing. Okay, so combining the two tools together, and really what we're trying to draw out of this is actually the power and the advantages of the two tools. So avoiding repeating code, how we can increase test coverage. So we're creating good, high-quality test cases, which are actually delivering value, to assuring that we're delivering a good piece of software every time we run our test cases, and also maximizing velocity, so helping us move faster and keep up with that rate of change that, we're facing from development, as we mentioned at the beginning. Okay, so those are kind of the core concepts that I just want you to think about as we're going through the webinar today. So, what is model-based test automation? What is model-based testing? So for us, we're going to be using one of the tools provided by our company, Curiosity Software, and that is called Test Modeler. And this is basically a piece of software for model-based testing. Now, what we're going to be using Test Modeler for is to build a reactive model of the system. Okay, so basically, it's a big term, model. We're just kind of talking about a flow chart here. So we're going to be building a flowchart of how the application should work, or we're going to be building a flowchart of how we want the system to work before we build it, before we actually develop it. Okay. And at the center here, really, we're just talking about having a flowchart available. Now, what we have is a whole world of accelerators to get started with model-based testing. We have application scanners, we have recorders, we can get started from BDD scenarios, such as Gherkin feature files, for instance. We can import existing manual test cases, we can work with existing automation frameworks. We have very good tooling with the whole Micro Focus tool suite, all the way from the automation execution tools to the test case management tools like ALM and Octane, et cetera, okay? Now, one of the pieces we often see in a lot of organizations at the moment is a lot of them are already creating diagrams, especially product owners. We see a lot of BTMN diagrams floating around as well as Visio diagrams. We can bring them in and they are directly transposable and can be imported into Test Modeler to start the modeling journey. Okay, but really all of these pieces on the left-hand side are just accelerators to get started with model-based testing and creating a model. Once you have a model, what you can use that for is generating the optimal set of test cases to test your system. Okay. Now, when I'm talking about the optimal or perfect set of test cases, what I'm talking about is the minimum number of tests, the smallest number, to maximize coverage across the application I'm testing. Okay. And we have some very powerful algorithms to take that model and create that perfect set of test cases. Once you have got those tests, you can push them out into your standard kind of test case management systems. So you may be using Jira with some kind of test case management plugin like Zephyr or Xaway. You may have something like TFS, or was recently renamed to Azure DevOps. You may be using some of the Micro Focus tool suite like Octane or ALM, or you may have some custom formats like Excel or PDF files. Okay, we can take the tests we generate and we can publish them into any of these tools. The next piece here is test data. Now, we mentioned this a bit at the beginning. Test data is very, very challenging, especially as you start to go into your more advanced automation scenarios. Okay, I want to test this particular route through my system. I need data which has these specific types of characteristics to actually test that screen. Okay, so what we have built into Test Modeler is very extensive capabilities to go into a whole world of different data sources, such as SAP, Oracle, SQL Server, the new kind of containerized databases like MongoDB, Kafka, et cetera, we can go into these data sources and we can say, go and find me data, go and find me the right type of data that I need to actually run this test case dynamically. Okay, if we cannot find any data, we also have capabilities to go away and say, go and make me the data I need, which meets these characteristics as well, and then return it back so I can consume it in my test case. The third piece here is test automation. Now, test automation is absolutely massive now. There's so many tools out there, especially in the open source world, like Appium, Selenium. There's a lot of Java-based frameworks, C#, Python, etc. In this demo, we're going to be focusing exclusively on UFT, and what that is going to entail is overlaying actions like function libraries, object repositories, overlaying those actions on top of the model. And what we will get from that model is basically our automation scripts automatically generated for us. Okay, so in effect, we're kind of automating the automation through Test Modeler. Now, the core benefit here is that obviously, as we mentioned at the beginning, most companies are moving towards agile software development now. And basically what that's entailing is that, we're doing a lot of releases and a lot of changes are happening between every release that we're producing. Okay. With those changes, we have to go through and we have to manually update our test cases, our test data, and our test automation classically. Okay, with Test Modeler, all we have to do is update the models. Okay, keep our models up to date and in synchronization with our application, and we will automatically regenerate the tests and synchronize them back into your test case management system. We will make sure you have the right test data you need to support those tests automatically. And we will also automatically regenerate the automation every time. So we're automatically synchronizing all of these assets through the model. Okay, so in this demo, what we're really going to be doing is we're going to be starting from some UFT object repositories, which could have come through the UFT recorder, or they could have come through the UFT object spy. So we're going to bring in those object repositories, and we're going to synchronize them into Test Modeler. We're going to use them to create some automated models very quickly. In the later part of the demonstration, we will take a look at how we can pull in test data. But for now, we're just going to be focused on creating UFT scripts through Test Modeler and pushing them back out into UFT and executing them. Now, one of the main benefits here for using Test Modeler with UFT is that actually you only need one or two good automation engineers sat there maintaining the frameworks and really just keeping the wheels on all of our automation. What we can have in Test Modeler is a much larger team of business users, such as business analysts, product owners, and even perhaps some manual testers who are living inside Test Modeler, creating models of how the system should work, and they can leverage all of the automation actions which are being created by our automation engineers. So just one final slide here, and this is really just going to summarize exactly what we're going to be doing in the demonstration. So as an automation engineer, we can come in and we can maintain our framework, create any custom automation code that we need. Again, we could also be in there creating any object repositories. Okay, so the automation engineer is really living in this kind of top half here. Within Test Modeler, we can have business users who are building models, and they're basically leveraging these automation actions. From these models, business users can come in and automatically generate tests. They can be pushed out into your test case management system. Also, as part of this test generation, they can generate their automation scripts. These can be pushed into some kind of source control management system. Really, the output here that we care about is being able to run this automation and push it back out into our UFT automation frameworks for execution. So we're having a real clear separation of concerns here. Business users are able to use their business knowledge to create models of how the system should work that they want developing. And also as a result of that, create tests and create automation. Our automation engineers are really sat in there doing the hard stuff, the fun stuff, creating the automation framework, maintaining it, and creating any custom automation actions we need for automating the hard pieces of our application. So let's jump in and actually see what this looks like in reality. So we're going to start off inside UFT, and the first application we're going to take a look at is basically a little e-commerce system. Okay, so very classic e-commerce system. We can come in here, we can go into different categories and order, all sorts of lovely products. But there's also a section in here where we can go in and we can sign up and register a new account. And we can also go in and authenticate a new user by signing in to our system. Okay. Now, what we have done in UFT is we have come in and we have created an object repository for this e-commerce application. So I'm just going to come in here to our object repository manager, and I'm just going to open up an object repository that we've already created inside UFT. And we've basically done this through scanning the application using the object spy. So we'll open up our Magento object repository here. And what you'll see is that we've got a world of objects that we scanned for different components of our application. So we've got one for the checkout screen, we've got one for the login screen where we can enter a username, a password, and we can click sign in. And we've also got some in here for the other pages in our application. Okay, so pretty classic object repository here that we have created. So what we're going to do firstly is we're going to come into Test Modeler here, which you will see is a web-based platform. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. So we'll come in here, we'll create a new project called Magento Webinar. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select what automation framework we want to use for this project. And you'll see, we support a whole world of different frameworks. We're going to be using UFT here. We'll select that tool and we'll hit save. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to import our object repository, which exists in UFT. So we're going to come in here and we're going to go to import and we're going to select UFT repository. And we're then going to come in and we're going to select to import this repository into Test Modeler. Now this is going to go away and it's going to do its import. And basically what this is going to do is a full synchronization of that object repository. Okay, so we're not just flatly importing it. If something changes in our object repository and we do a re-import, we will synchronize those changes and bring them in. What you'll see here is we have brought in that object repository, and we have all of our objects here, like the login, the username, the password, etc., which have been imported into Test Modeler and are now available as usable actions which we can use to create models. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to come in here and we are going to start off by creating a model for our login screen. So I'll create a new model here and I'll call that login. And we'll open that up, and what it's going to open is our model editor. Now, for those of you who have used tools like Visio and other kind of BPMN-like tools, this is going to look very familiar. We've got BPMN type actions on the left-hand side, and we can use these and drag and drop them to create models. Okay. Now, where Test Modeler comes into its own is it's basically a modeling tool which is kind of turbocharged for testing. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to drag and drop a start block. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to navigate on the right-hand side into our object repository where we can see, all of the actions that we created in UFT. Okay. Here we're going to be focusing exclusively on the login screen. And what we can do is we can come in here and we can see the actions which are available for us inside each of these objects. This is entirely customizable. We can come in here and add more actions if we need to. But for now, this is going to suffice. So I'm thinking about our login page right now, and I need to think about what actions I want to test on that page and how they're all going to link together. Now, the first thing I want to do is go to the login page and actually open the URL. So I'm going to hit that and we click import. And what you'll see here is that has created an open URL doc for me here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to set the username. Okay. So we'll come in here, we'll click import, and what we'll see here is that we have two blocks that have been created this time. We have the concept of a valid username, which is kind of our happy journey. What is a valid username? We also have our invalid username, which is kind of our negative journey here. What's going to happen when we enter some bad data? So we're importing our actions here, and Test Modeler is basically coming through and automatically defining different equivalence classes for me here for the different components that I'm bringing in. Now, what we're going to do is we'll finish this off just by clicking the sign in button. And I'm just going to do a quick little relayout just so this looks a little bit neater. Now, if I go through here and I open the URL, I enter a valid username and I enter a valid password, and I click the sign in button, and in theory, I should end up authenticated here. Okay, that's kind of my happy journey. If I go through and drop off in any of these other states here, where I enter an invalid username or an invalid password, and I click the sign in button, then I should end up in some kind of negative or error state. And this is where I may come in and I may start adding some assertions or some checkpoints, which I may have scanned, which I didn't do here, and start asserting that specific error messages are shown within this particular UI screen. Okay. Now, the premise here is that by the end, once you have created a model, this should represent a visual image of how your particular component of the system operates. Okay. So here we have a visual image which represents how our login process works. If I enter a valid username with a valid password, I am authenticated. If I enter some combination of an invalid password or an invalid username, I end up in some kind of error. Now, if we look underneath these blocks, so let's look at a valid username, what you'll see is that we have the concept of test data. Okay. Now, if we look inside here at the valid username block, what you'll see is that we have a variable called username, and in here we've got a little data expression. Now, what we have sat behind this is a whole world of synthetic data generation functions to be able to go away and randomly generate data with all sorts of characteristics, like different names, different phone numbers, different financials, different companies, different addresses. There's about 500 synthetic data generation functions in here. And what that will basically do is every time it will give me a random username in this case. Okay. Now, we can also go much deeper than this. We can go into all sorts of backend data sources to go and find data for me and pull that in and overlay it on the model. Now, what we're going to do here is actually we're going to enter some static data because there's only one valid email and one valid password which actually works in my system. So we will come in here and we'll replace this value and we will enter our valid username. And we'll also do the same with our valid password here. So we've got those right credentials that are coming through, going to perform the valid authentication for me. So we'll come in here, we'll ping that in, and we basically have our model for signing in. Now, what we can do next is we can use this model to generate some test cases. So we're going to come in here, we're going to hit the generate button. And what that is going to do is it's going to generate 3 scenarios for me here. This is the minimum number of tests to maximize coverage across our model. Okay. And we'll see here we've got a path which says when I enter a valid username and a valid password and click the sign in button, I'll end up authenticated. And then I've got my 2 paths here which represent my negative journeys or my negative conditions I can end up in. Now, what we basically have sat behind here when I hit that generate button is we have a pretty comprehensive set of algorithms which will go away and generate that minimum number of tests based on a specific particular coverage criteria I define. So I click them in here and say I want a low level of coverage, which is going to cover every single node in the model. I want a medium level of coverage, which is going to cover every single edge in the model. I want a high level of coverage, which is going to cover every single decision. So if I have 2 edges coming into a block, 3 edges coming out, I will have 6 tests passing through that particular component. And what we're doing in Test Modeler is we're condensing all of those, parts down to be the minimum number of tests every time. Now we could come in here and we could say I want to have an exhaustive level of tests, and that's going to give me every single possible route. But as you can imagine, here we're testing quite a simple component, just a login screen. But when we start creating models which are much more complex, which I will show you in a minute, that number can get very, very quick, very big very quickly. Okay, so it's always good to pick a coverage metric in here, which is going to give you, the level of tests that I want to be testing up. Now,
Hi,
once
James.
we have,
sorry to interrupt, James. You're coming across a bit muffled. Would you be able to adjust either your microphone or your volume?
Is that better?
That is better. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Sorry about that. Okay, so we've just gone through the different coverage levels we have here. Now, what we can do next is we can use these test cases to actually generate some automation scripts inside UFT. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come in and we're going to say generate automation. And we're going to go off and generate some UFT automation for our Magento system. So we'll come in here and hit execute. And that's basically going to go away now, and it's going to take these three paths and it's going to compute and automatically generate the different automation scenarios for us. So we'll just give this one a second just to finish. Okay, we'll see that complete. And what we're going to get on the back end here is a little zip file we can download. We'll just get that a second. And what we're going to see inside the zip file is basically we're going to have our UFT tests that have been generated. Now, what we will typically do here is we can integrate with source control management systems, where we will basically automatically perform a pull request and publish these tests into the location you want them to be created. So what we're going to do here is we're going to come back into UFT, we'll come into Open, and we'll just navigate to the folder here, the UFT test folder, and let's pick out one of these tests and take a look. So we'll open this one up. And what you're going to see here is we have the actions that we overlay on the model. Okay, so firstly, we're going to go to our URL to perform the login. We're then going to enter our valid username, our valid password, and we will click the sign in button. And we can now go away and we can run this test either in our UFT environment or as part of our CI process. We'll see here the browser's opening. Oops. Valid URL. Anyway, so this is going to go off. It will run our tests and it will run our automation. And that will go through and basically run that test case for us. The problem here is that we've not got our object repository assigned, so let me just pick that one up. Come in here, we'll just assign our object repository. That one out. Choose it in here. We'll just link that one up. Magento repository. And then we could go off here and we could run these scripts. This one will now work because we've got the right object repository associated here. Okay, we'll see it's going through, entering our username and password, and then clicking the sign in button. Okay, now obviously this is quite a simple example. In the real world, we have much more complex systems which have a lot more screens and a lot more logic which is involved. So the next piece I want to show you here is how we can actually deal with those types of systems and handle that, level of complexity. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up a new project that we have here. So we'll open up one of our example projects, and let's take a look inside this one. Let's open this one up. Now, once we've created a model, it basically becomes a reusable component. Okay, so if I want to create a much bigger process where our login screen is involved, all I have to do is drag and drop the sub-process here. I can come in and I could say I want to have a login screen. So we'll come in here, select our login flow, and what we'll see is that that login flow has been embedded here. If I click the plus arrow here, what you'll see is that that contains all of our logic that we just created in our model. Okay. What we can then do is we can connect that up into a much bigger end-to-end process. So I could come in here and I could say, go away and perform the login. Okay. If I perform a login successfully and I end up authenticated, go away and go through another building block here, which is going to go and add some items in a shopping cart. And then go away and perform our checkout process. Okay, so every time I build a model, it becomes a reusable building block. And I can use this to then connect it and link it into much bigger end-to-end scenarios that I want to test with. As a general rule of thumb, it's good practice to break things up into very small components. So if I'm testing a UI, I would split it up into probably every single screen I'm testing, or every single kind of widget within that screen. If I'm testing an API, I would split it up so the models are representing each API endpoint that I'm testing. What I should be able to do is reuse those components, drag them together, and build up a much bigger end-to-end process. Now, these sub-processes can go very deep. Here we've just got kind of one level inside it. You could have sub-process and sub-process and sub-process. There's no limitation. But the main benefit here is you have these reusable building blocks, which are very componentized, reusable, and can be connected together to make much bigger end-to-end processes. Now, the other benefit here is, as we were talking about at the beginning, most applications we work with now are inside agile, development methodologies. They're changing very rapidly. Whenever a part of my system changes, so let's say our login process changes here, before I can click the sign in button, I have to go away and enter some kind of captcha, or some kind of validation that I'm not a machine. So I can come in here and say, we're going to have a new step, which is I have to enter captcha message. Okay, so we'll add that in, connect it up. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to save this model. Okay, we'll save our model here. If I come in and reopen our block here, what you will see is our login flow has now propagated upwards into our much bigger master flow here. And now all I have to do is come in and do a generate. And what that will do is regenerate all of my paths, all of my tests, and all of my automation for me. Okay, so whenever I have a change that occurs, I just have to update the places in my models which have been impacted, and then every single other asset that has been generated off these models, my test cases, my automation, and my test data will get updated as part of that process. So that's basically Test Modeler and how we can use it for UFT. The second piece here, which we're going to go through just to look at a bit more of a complex example, is going to be incorporating test data as well. Now, if we're thinking about test data, it basically revolves down to three kind of levels. Okay, I'm doing some testing, whether that be through an automation framework or whether it be through manual test cases. And I need to go in and I need to find the right data. I need to perform the test cases I need. Okay, I need to go and get test data provisioned for me and made for the test cases I'm going to execute. Or I may want to allocate and assign specific test data to a specific test case to avoid tests clashing with each other and reusing data that's no longer valid. Okay, this is basically the three different kinds of levels of data problems and data challenges and tasks that I have as a tester to perform with my test cases that I'm running. Now, what we have inside our system here is we basically have a little demo system, which is a CRM system. And inside this CRM system, what we can do is we can go away and we can create opportunities. Okay, so pretty classic kind of CRM type page. There's a lot of input fields. This particular page has two challenges. If I want to go through and test the screen, I need to know what accounts exist in the background, otherwise I get an account not found error. And I also need to know what campaigns exist, otherwise I get a campaign not found error. So as a tester, I need to know what accounts actually exist that I can consume and use here, and what campaigns actually exist that I can consume in my UI. Now this is obviously an example of actually plugging data into a user interface. It may be that I need to assert some data. So I may have some kind of dashboard screen where I have loads of tables, different graphs, etc. And I want to assert that those graphics and those charts actually represent the data they should be in my backend systems. Okay. Now, what we have sat behind this UI is we basically have a SQL Server database. And inside this database, there's two tables that we care about. There is a accounts table, which has all of our accounts in. And what you'll see here is that we've actually got quite a few accounts. We've got about 64. We've also got a few campaigns here. So we've got a campaigns table. And what we've got in this campaigns table is we have different campaign names. We also have different statuses of campaigns like active, valid, inactive, planning, etc. We've also got different campaign types. So we can have a campaign type of email, web, telesales, etc. Okay. Now, what we have done is we have basically built out a little catalog of reusable data components for the CRM system. So within our data catalog here, we have functions which will go away and find an account name for me. We've also got functions that will go away and find different campaigns. Now, this campaigns one is actually quite interesting. If I open this up, what you'll see is that it's basically a function for going away and finding campaigns by a type and a state that is given. So what's basically going to happen here is we've cast a bit of SQL, which we'll see here, which basically says, go and find me a campaign by campaign type and status, and these are parameterized up. So we're going to be looking up against that campaigns table. So we've got a little function here, give me a campaign type, give me a campaign status, and return for me a campaign name. Okay. Now, as a manual tester, I can come in and I could consume this function. And that's what we're going to do firstly. So we'll come in here and we'll say, this is James's pivot test. And we're going to go in and we're going to try and find a campaign. And we want to find a campaign which has a type of email and a status of active. Okay. So we'll create that, we'll hit save. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go off and run this. And that's basically going to go away and find me data I need of this specific characteristic. Now, this is obviously running against SQL Server. This could be running against any of the database technologies I mentioned at the beginning, or it could even be going into APIs, web front ends. It could be going through your new containerized technologies. There's a lot of different data sources and targets we could be dealing with here. But here, what you will see is this has come back with the value of the campaign in this case, which matches the criteria that I've given over here. Okay. Now, the real power here comes that I can consume these data functions within my models that I'm creating. So what we have done is we have created a model here for firstly the level where we're going through this web UI and we're entering different account names, different opportunity names, different amounts, etc. But the one that we actually care about here is this one. And this is where we've modeled out the different types of campaigns that exist inside my system. So we have different campaigns of type email, print, web, telesales, mail, and we have different states, complete, active, planning, inactive, etc. Okay. Now, if we open up this model and we take a look at it, what you will see inside our automation actions here is we have overlaid our finds to go and find me, data based on these different characteristics here. So we're going to go away and we're going to find different types of campaigns based on, our different campaign types and our different states. And what this model will do here is it's going to generate me my UFT code, but also with these test data functions in to dynamically go away and find me the data I need when I run my automation just in time. So here, when I go and hit generate, we've got all of our paths passing through these different systems. If I come in and just show you some of these automation that's generated. So let me come into this one here. This folder. What you'll see is the corresponding set of automation scripts that are created inside UFT. And what we're going to do now is we'll come into UFT and open one of these up. We'll come in here and let's pick out maybe one of the interesting ones, like this one. We'll open up a positive one here. We don't want to save this test, that's fine. So we'll open up one of our UFT tests. And what you're basically going to see here, again, all this code was also generated. So at the top, we're saying we want to go away and we want to go and find particular types of data for this test case that we're running. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go away and dynamically get the account names that I can use in my automation. We're going to dynamically get our campaign names, which meet the given criteria that are specified. And when we're setting our account names and our campaign names through the web front end, we're going to consume these dynamic values and use them. So if we go off here and run this automation, so we'll hit run, what we'll see is that in a second it's going to open the browser. And what's basically going to happen is it's going to go through and it's going to go away and automatically start to find all of this data we need for this particular test case we're running. And then what it's going to do is we'll see here in a second, it's going to go through, in here. Okay, it's going to go through and perform the login. It's going to go through and enter the data here. And what you'll see crucially, we go back and look inside UFT. And we look here at our account names and our opportunity names. The values that have been set, the dynamic. These are what we've found through our finds. And it's dynamically found the accounts and it's dynamically found the opportunities that I need for these particular automation tests that I am running inside UFT here. Okay, so this is basically how I can go in and I can connect UFT or any other automation framework I have to go and find data I need for my automation tests. I can also make data if it is not found, which we did not go through here for time's sake, and also allocate data to specific tests. It's all sorts of different data sources, SQL Server, Solr, MySQL, SAP, Oracle, etc., etc. So that concludes both of the demos which we wanted to go through today. Hopefully you've seen some of the benefits here of model-based test automation in combination with UFT. And we've also shown you how we can overcome some of the barriers to test automation. So instead of having slow and repetitious test creation, we can also generate our automated tests from, flowcharts, which are very easy to use. Anyone can come in and start dragging and dropping, different building blocks together to create our automation tests. We've also got our algorithms, which can go away and create the smallest number of tests for rigorous testing to maximize coverage. We can overlay rich sets of test data, whether that be initially going in and overlaying synthetic test data, or whether it be going very deep under the covers and going in and start binding data from all sorts of external data sources and pulling them in. We can also, very easily get past the test maintenance problem. All we have to do is update flowcharts, and we can go through and update all of our tests, all of our test data, and all of our other assets, which we've created as part of the model. And also, you don't need a team of highly qualified automation engineers, to come in and actually create these test scenarios. You can have your product owners, your business analysts, your manual testers come through and actually start consuming our object repositories, our function libraries, any automation actions that have been created, overlay them on the model, and start creating, rich test automation that can be consumed in automation frameworks. So anyone can get started and get building the automation through Test Modeler. Okay, so Tom, just going to hand this back to you. Do you want to wrap up with these follow-ups?
Yeah, of course. So just before we do Q&A, so if anybody would like to carry on the conversation, you can book a meeting with James on calendly.com/curiosity-james. You can drop James an email. You've got the email address at the bottom there, james.walker@curiosity.software. Do visit testmodeler.io if you want to try this approach. We have a free trial, and then we've also got a couple of UFT tutorials to help you get started, so you can very quickly get started. So James, if you go to the next slide, please, we'll start the Q&A. Now, we've got more questions than we can answer today, but as I said at the start, we will publish the Q&A with our answers on the Vivid website. So please continue using the question panel to ask questions. We'll answer them afterwards. We'll publish them on the Vivid website. So James, we've had two questions about the object repository and whether you need to use a UFT object repository. One person asks if you can use function libraries instead. We've got another question asking if you can use descriptive programming.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So both of those are possible. In this webinar, we focus pretty heavily on object repositories, but also what you can do is you can come in here and you can import any existing function libraries you have. So here we've got a function library for a login screen. We can import that in and the actions become available on the right-hand side in Test Modeler in exactly the same way, where we can start dragging and dropping them and overlaying them on the model. You could also come into our our UI, and you can start to come in and actually add custom actions and custom code in here for each of the actions you want to perform as well. So it's very, very flexible. We support function libraries, object repositories, custom BD code, etc., etc. So it's very, very flexible in terms of mapping to how you're using UFT and also the objects that you have available today to consume them in Test Modeler. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you, James. So just a quick question on test data automation. So somebody's asked whether it also supports data obfuscation or masking.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've kind of gone through here is what we're calling test data automation. So linking your automation framework to the right data you need just in time as you're running your automation. So this is more kind of dynamic. I have a test case. What data do I actually need to run this test? We also have utilities for masking, subsetting, cloning, which are kind of your more traditional test data management kind of tools, which is really where you're taking production data, stripping out any PII data and actually obscuring it with either random data or pseudo anonymous data, etc., etc. So we have a whole world of capabilities in that space as well. Absolutely.
Cool. And we'll do one more before we wrap up. So in 30 seconds, James, how does this support a scenario where the test environment is not available for recording through the object SPI?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that case, what you will find is you're kind of shifting your testing left. Okay. So you would be building a model of how you want the system to work, or essentially what the requirement is. Okay. So you can build that up. You build a model. You can generate your manual tests from that model before any code is actually written. Okay. Once that code has been developed and is in one of my UAT environments or in my test environment, that is where I can start overlaying my automation. So I would then take that model and I would overlay my automation actions on top of it. Okay. So you've got to think about what can I do before any code is actually developed and what can I do afterwards. Ideally, you should be doing as much as possible on the left-hand side, and that's really what Test Modeler is enabling, is do more earlier so you can move faster later on when you need to. Okay.
All right, thanks, James. So we've still got plenty of questions left. We will answer those and they'll be sent out to you in the follow-up email. So if you could go to the next slide, please, James, we'll just wrap up. So there's a lot of Vivid events online on the Vivid calendar, both in person and virtual. Please do check out that calendar and share the events with your colleague. And then next slide, please, James. And the last thing to say, of course, is thank you all for joining. You will get a copy of the recording in the coming days, along with the Q&A and the slides. When the webinar ends, there'll be a short survey. If you could take the couple of minutes to fill that out, we'd love to know your feedback. So thank you all for joining. And James, thank you for the exciting and interesting webinar.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.